I've taken our personal ranch, which is called Iron Spike Ranch, and we run a nonprofit out of here, which is called Carmel Farms. Now that my kids have grown up, they also have a heart for other kids, and they help me with this project. And what it is to help kids to have a chance to come out and see things they wouldn't normally have an opportunity to get up close and personal with sheep and dairy goats and chickens and ducks and all of these horses, things that they might see in a book or hear about. And so we help kids to connect with these animals. We help them to learn some truths about life, some truths about creation, and some irrefutable, immutable principles that run nature and run human nature.
I created in 2002 a volunteer organization where we once a month we go to nursing homes and retirement homes and we spend time with the residents. I feel very passionately about that group in society that is kind of forgotten. And so I really want to make a difference in that. So I've created this organization that we're still doing things. Once a month, we go spend time with the elderly, and we spend time with them, doing whatever you want to do. Read books, you can play music for them, just talk to them. Interact as human beings, engage them in conversations.
Now we are interdenominational, non-traditional, independent missionaries, and we're the only Americans on the team. All of our team members are Ethiopians and live in Ethiopia except us. We travel back and forth now 3 or 4 times a year. We take teams who do all kinds of things, and we spend maybe a third of the year, fourth of the year in Ethiopia, and the rest of the time in the States.
I myself was an inner city kid. I was born in Brooklyn, New York, and raised in the Bronx, in the ghettos of Bronx. My dad came to the U.S., came to the States from Puerto Rico. He wasn't speaking the language real well. We had a lot of government assistance and things like that. And I was in a program called the Fresh Air Fund. And what that is, New Yorkers are familiar with it, but they take these inner city kids and they send them off to live with another family for a couple of years.
We started with small steps, working in missions projects, communicating with people in foreign countries. And I remember Kay asked me one time, she said, "John, what do you think about missions?" I said, "Oh, that's great for some people, but I'm not called." And that was a mere 5 years before we went to Ethiopia. And so what got us started was doing a little bit. And then God just caused that seed to grow.
When I first came, I graduated from college and I came here, it was all about me. I'm on my own, I gotta survive, I gotta, pay the bills, blah, blah, blah. And I had it that I have to make myself look good on my resume and start building that resume. Like that's who I really was at first. It wasn't the helper of society until later. So what I started doing is I thought, well, how can I make myself look good? And I thought about playing piano at nursing homes.
In our current situation, we have evangelists that we support and encourage and train who actually work in mosques in 100% Muslim areas. This is a very dangerous work.
For a believer.
For a believer. This one that we were working with, and he related this story to us personally, is that he was in the mosque for 3 weeks because it was a celebration. After 2 weeks, an elderly gentleman, he was 85 years old, came to him and he had his Quran book and he said, "I've been carrying this for 40 years looking for the truth." No, it was in a Quran cover.
Right.
And he said, "I've been carrying this for 40 years looking for the truth. I think you might be able to help me." He opened it up and it's a Bible. He's been carrying a Bible in his Quran cover for 40 years.
Looking for someone to explain it to him for 40 years.
So our evangelist spent the next week with him inside the mosque, teaching him about what the Bible says. At the end, the man said, "You must take this to my children. You must take this truth to them. I've been searching for it." So when the feast was over, this evangelist went, however far it was, 30 miles or so. He found this man's son who gathered the family, and there were about 30 of them there. He spent 3 days explaining what he had taught to the father. At the end, the eldest son stood up and said, "My father had been gone for 40 years seeking the truth. He has found it and sent it to us. We must accept this." They baptized the entire family of 30 people that afternoon.
So at 7 years old, I'm put on a train and something's tagged to my shirt, and my parents wave goodbye, and I don't know where I'm going, but after a time, I arrive at a train station in Long Island, and I'm picked up by a family of virtual strangers, but that's how the Fresh Air Fund works. And I'd never met them before, and they take me to their home, which was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. And those people took me in to make a difference in my life. But years later, their daughter grew up and wrote a book about me, which was published. It's called The Fresh Air Kid. And as it turns out, she tells the story of how at 7 years old, I went into these people's home and changed their lives because they were looking at this child who seemed to have nothing, no hope, nothing to offer, and they were going to help me. But then I came in, and the way she tells the story, this energy and this hope against seeming hopelessness.
So I started playing piano at a local nursing home, and I didn't like it. It smelled bad. It smelled like death to me, and it was scary. I didn't talk to anybody. I avoided talking to people, actually. It was very uncomfortable. So I was there playing piano for like 2 or 3 hours, uncomfortable the whole time, kind of tense, but doing my job, doing my duty so that now it'll go on my resume and it'll look good. And over time, my employers, as I shift and like become more well-known or whatever, as I grow as an adult, it'll look good on my resume. So anyways, that's very uninspiring, by the way. So it didn't last very long. I probably did that for about a year, and then I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore.
You know, I went to school to be a park ranger and to work in the outdoors because, like I said, I fell in love with the outdoors, and I understood, even though I wasn't saved at that time, that I was touching something greater than myself when I was in the outdoors. It helped me put me in perspective. But there was a time when the government went in the 80s. They had a riff in the federal government and jobs were cut, and I went into the private sector. And I thought, well, gosh, if I have to sit behind a desk, then I might as well earn a lot of money. And I did. I did things. I went into international marketing, and that's a whole nother deal, but made my money and pursued a high dollar career for a time. But, you know, I had all the trappings, the fancy car and the house in a planned subdivision and, Fifth Avenue shopping and everything else. And, I could never get away from something's missing. My life, I have all this and my life is so hollow. It's counting for nothing. And I took a job with a large company that had a headquarters in Florida. And I thought, oh, wow, Florida, I get to enjoy the beach and I can live nice and go golfing. And I did. And then a competitor came along and wanted to buy that company out. And I had to make a choice. Do I want to move to Chicago with this outfit, or what do I want to do? And I said, let's pretend that something came along and just wiped the slate blank. And my life was mine to do whatever I wanted with. Would I do this? And the answer was no. It was so easy to walk away from the fancy business card and the suit and the traveling and working with ambassadors and senators. And it was just so easy to walk away from that because it was so hollow. And you know what I did? That's when I said, if my life was my own to do whatever I wanted, what would I do? And I took a job earning about 1/5 of what I was making to work at that Marine Institute and help those adjudicated kids. And I never looked back.
I went through a series of, phases in my life where I matured. I would go to church more often, like actually read the Bible. I did stuff to help myself grow, and as a result of that, then I thought, you know what? It's not about me. It's about others. So that was when I actually started thinking, well, maybe I can go back to that nursing home and play piano there, but not this time for me or my resume, but for them. And so I started doing that. I went back, and it was a whole different context. So now I went to the nursing home, the same nursing home as before. I hadn't been there in like 2 or 3 years. I'd taken a break, and now I'm going there to peep for somebody else, not for me. So it's not me playing the songs that I like whenever I like, and everybody be quiet but listen to my songs. I would play until somebody asked me a question, then I would stop and talk to them. And I would interact with them. I would actually treat them like the human beings that they are. And then it became not about me, and it totally shifted my world. It's totally different when you're being of service for others than when it's about you. Totally, my life changed. And that's when I met a woman named Jo.
There were so many things that we had to do, just from taking us from making short-term mission trips to living in Ethiopia. We were doing the short-term trips with our church, and we were supposed to go to Bulgaria. And our missions pastor said, no, I don't want you to go to Bulgaria. I want you to go to Ethiopia on a vision trip. We'd been going to Mexico, great, and now we're going to Ethiopia. Well, that's Africa, that's far away, but we decided that this was what we wanted to do because of the Wednesday night service where God had really put the passion in our hearts for Ethiopia. So we talked to the missionary that night. We told him, yes, we would like to come and help you. And he said, I don't need someone for 3 weeks. And I don't need someone for 3 months. I need someone for 3 years. So we said, okay, let's see what we can do. Well, John was still working for Shell. And you had to check into all that retirement thing.
I did have to check into the retirement thing, do it, figure out how our finances were going to work without a paycheck. We had to schedule the training that we needed. And then all of a sudden we were on the way, and we were immersed full time, living in Ethiopia, thinking that we were going there to help. But within a few weeks, we were named the team leaders because our boss, the guy who came on Wednesday night, resigned and left just as we got there. And so we became team leaders all of a sudden.
And I was playing piano at a nursing home, a local nursing home, on Saturdays. And I befriended a woman named Jo. And she was basically had arthritis and diabetes, and she was there because no one could take care of her. And she hated being there. She was mentally very cognizant, and we had a lot of conversations, which philosophical and everything. I really enjoyed spending time with her, but she really hated being there. And she looked forward to me coming to visit and playing for them, for the people at the nursing home. So we developed this friendship, and she told me how like her greatest wish was for her granddaughter, who lived like in Tennessee or someplace, to come and take her, and they lived together somewhere. And so I thought, that's great. I can't do much. I can't help you with that. I hope that happens for you, because I wanted her to be inspired again with life. You know, instead of just waiting to die. She says she felt like she was kind of waiting to die, like just kind of dumped there. So I say, well, what do you want to do that you've never done before? Like, what dreams have you never fulfilled? Like, this is an opportunity, because if I was stuck in a home, hey, I could learn another language. I could, you know what I mean? And so she said, well, I've always wanted to learn to play the piano. I said, I can help you with that. So we started lessons that day. It was a Saturday, and every Saturday I'd go see her, and we had like 30 minutes, and she would be frustrated because she forget what, she didn't practice. And I'm like, you are doing it, you're learning it, and this is really great. Like something you've always wanted to do that you've never done. And I could tell that her life was different. Like the nurse staff said that she was eating, because she would eat in her room by herself, and now she was eating with other people and being more social. And I'm like, wow, it's making a difference for her. Until 3 months later, gone. I came on Saturday, and I thought her name was missing from her door, and I thought, I'm thinking, what if Jo passed? I'm like, I wouldn't like that.
1993, I came to Houston as a professional speaker and for a company called Memory Training Institute, and I really felt strong about that job. I was doing really well, but for some reason, and I couldn't follow the script that they wanted to teach me. I was having difficulty concentrating, and eventually I lost that job. And when I lost that job, I was literally out of money. I was literally out of hope. I had moved my whole life down to here to Houston, and it went bankrupt. I remember being in an Audi 5000, a car I purchased in Dallas before I came, and it blew up at an intersection, and it didn't run. I looked back. I didn't know what to do. I had a friend pick me up and take me back to my apartment where I was living at the time, and I kept thinking, God, what do you want me to do with this? And I didn't hear back from God. And that Sunday, I thought about leaving back to go back to Dallas. And Sunday, I had $95, $100 in my pocket, and I wanted to get back home. So I prayed, and the Lord just kind of directed me to go to church. So I did. I drove all over Houston looking for a church. I saw this little white church down here in Southwest Houston. And so I was in the pew, and as I was leaving, a younger man came up, the only one that was younger there, and he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "You having problems? Can I help you?" I said, "Well, I'm thinking about going back to Dallas tomorrow. I lost my job, and I need to leave." He said, "Well, I'll let you stay with me for a couple of weeks. Why don't you just stay a couple of weeks and think about it?" And so, not knowing this guy, I knew it was from God, something was going on. So I said, "Yeah, okay." So I went over to this man and stayed with him for a couple of weeks, and a couple of weeks became 3 weeks, and then 4 weeks, and then 5 weeks, and 6, and the 7th week, he said, "I have a friend that needs someone to sell advertising for him in this construction industry magazine."
And I asked the nurses, and I said, "Where's Joe?" And, "Oh, Joe, well, her granddaughter, she moved down here, and they moved to San Antonio together." And I thought, wow, she got what she wanted. But then I was upset. I went to go play piano that same day, right? I went to play, and I was in a bad mood. I'm playing piano. I don't care. I'm unmotivated. I'm like, what's going on with him? Why am I upset now? Just because Joe is not here to give me attention or connect with her? What's going on here? And it was like a miracle. It was like a miracle. I'm playing the piano, thinking the stuff in my head, playing the song, and it was, people in wheelchairs, they're kind of gathered around the piano, and they kind of mumbled to each other. And one of them mumbled, I could kind of barely hear out of as I was playing, and I heard something like, "I wish I could play piano like that." And I'm thinking, who said that? And I don't know, because there's a bunch of people, And so I keep playing, thinking about Joe and why am I upset, and I should be happy for her, and am I that selfish that she's not here to give me attention? And somebody else said the same thing. "Oh, I want to play piano like that too." And I'm thinking, why don't I come up with an organization that has people come and teach the elderly things that they've always wanted to do that they've never done, like what I was doing for Joe? And that's when I created the idea for the Feel Alive project.
Trying to put your relationship with God into words is like trying to explain a beautiful blue sky to a blind man who's never seen. You have to experience it. And what I want to give kids is the chance to experience it. So what I do with kids is I don't try to teach them about religion. I try to show them God, where he is every day in life, where they could experience him and experience the fact that his truths are immutable and irrefutable, and his reality is inescapable.
For me, the tipping point was when I had the opportunity to actually visit Cuba. And we'd been communicating with a family, and the church that we used to go to arranged and invited me to go along. And I went over to Cuba on a really massive mission trip. I got to dig ditches for the latrine system
In August.
in August while I was there. It was horrible. But when I came back is when I told Kay, this is going to be our life. For some reason, God got my heart on that trip and said, this is what you're going to do. Not necessarily digging ditches, but mission work.
Well, it helped me really quickly to see the things that were important to me. Family, so important to me. Before, not so much, When you possibly could lose someone that is so important to you, it just so changes everything in your perspective. The petty things, the little things that you think are important become not important. So another way that my sister's cancer, dealing with her cancer, affected me was that I felt, in general, that we care about the little things that are unimportant. I kind of sort of said that But when I started playing piano at MD Anderson Cancer Center, instead of the bars that I used to play, it was more important for me to play there. It was more needed. It was more useful there for society, for people, other people. I remember being more empathetic, being more like in the world of the patients, of the guests, right? People going through cancer, because I had gone through that with my sister.
And so I went and interviewed with this man, and he gave me a job. And it kept prospering. I couldn't believe it. This job prospered and prospered and prospered. And I was doing fantastic. I was tripled and doubled my income within 2 or 3 months. And one day, I walked into a guitar shop over here in Bel Air. I'd been ministering to this Chinese guy and helped him get a Bible for him and his wife. And I saw this sign on the door. It said guitar lessons here. And I always wanted to learn how to play guitar, so I walked into this shop. And this guy limped up to me and he said, "You know what? You're my first student today." And so I was back in this guitar shop room, and the owner of the guitar shop came up and told me, "Hey," he pointed at me and said, "You're going to be a future pastor and worship leader." I didn't know that. I was in advertising. I was doing fine, and I really believed that God wanted me to do that advertising job for the rest of my life because it was so successful.
One undercover Muslim background believer evangelist was in a restaurant having dinner, and a man came in and sat down at the table with him. And our evangelist said the Holy Spirit spoke to him and said, "Get up and leave this place." And so he got up and left, went outside, and there were a group of men out there waiting, and they said, "Why did you leave?" And the man said, "My God spoke to my heart and told me to get up and leave." And the guys said, "We have been trying to kill you for weeks now, and every time you avoid it. And if your God is the one that's saving you, then we need to know him."
Then this other man came into the guitar shop where I was taking this lesson and said, a man named David Ellis, Pastor Ellis, he said, "Do you like kids?" I said, "Yeah, I do." He goes, "Would you like to help me do some puppets with the kids?" And I said, "Yeah, why not?" So I volunteered to help him do that. And one of the volunteer jobs I did was on the streets with him, where we had a puppet stage near a school on the street. And I was doing the puppets helping, and I literally, through the crack in the stage, saw hundreds of kids running across the street to the stage to hear what was going on. And it was so powerful. And I remember that day, the kids were coming, and they were full of joy. And the puppets were doing, "This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine." And I thought, man, this is powerful. And at the same time, the principal back at the school and the teachers were calling the police on us, believe it or not. The principal of the school came up behind me and grabbed me by the arm and said, "You got to stop this. You can't keep doing this." And I said, "Why?" I said, "In a couple minutes, we'll be done." And he said, "Well, no, I've already called the police." So within minutes of the kids arriving, the police cars were coming up, and the policeman got out and asked if we had a sound permit. Pastor Dave said no, and so they dispersed the meeting. But at that moment of time, I realized the urgent need. These kids are so hungry to hear the gospel. And so I realized deep in my heart that this man, this pastor, had hit the nail on the head. Somehow he had broken through where others were afraid to go. He actually did it. It was challenged in doing it. But I saw, when you see the kids coming like that, when you see people coming up like that, hungry kids wanting to hear the word of God, it breaks your heart. And you want to, and something was planted in my spirit that day that said that I would always be going forward this way. And I didn't know how, but I continue to support this ministry from my professional perspective. And one day the Lord spoke to me and said, you need to quit your job, and you need to help this man to do his work.
But I remember there was this one gentleman who was just really moved to tears with my playing, and he was so grateful and thankful and for the peace that it gave him from what he was dealing with. And he introduced himself to me, thanked me for playing, and he told me about his wife who was diagnosed with cancer. I think like level 4. It was like stage 4. It's like extreme case. And was up on the floor. It was, MD Anderson, they have the different people in different floors based on the category of cancers they have, and it was on the same floor as my sister had been on. And he told me how much he would love for his wife to hear me, but she couldn't come down from that floor because it's basically the floor where everybody has to wear masks, and gloves, and people are very likely to get infected by just anything because their immune system is so low. And I thought, why not Why not go up there to her? You know? Can we do that? I don't know. Is it allowed? Is it in the rules? You know, so I thought, well, you know, this is worth it. I can get in trouble and I don't care. I'm going to do it. So I followed him into the room, and there was family gathered. People were crying and just so sad. There was so much heaviness in the room. You could feel it, you know? So I was immediately empathetic and, of course, reminded of my family situation and just what can I do for them to make it, you know, better for them, or not better, you know, but like peaceful, rested, something like this. The stuff was, it was just so thick, so much sadness.
I struggled with it for a little bit, but then I realized that God's peace was there. I didn't know how to do that. I went to my boss that day and I told him I was going to quit. And he was surprised. He was shocked. He goes, "Why? You're doing so well here. Why would you want to quit all this?" I said, "Well, what do I want to inner city and help kids, people?" He goes, "Are you sure about that? Are you really sure?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I'm sure." And he said, "Well, this man didn't believe in Christ at the time." He said, "I wish there were more people like you in the world. It would be a better place." He goes, "I release you to go." It was that day that I realized I left. I let go of my job, and it was in the early part of that year, in March of '96, that I got into full-time ministry at the Children's Activity Center, which really wasn't the Children's Activity Center at the time. It was just myself and Pastor Dave, his sister, his friend Jimmy Duncan, and a few others, and it was what it was. But we just continued to raise up kids. And on March 30th, 1996, we had our first Children's Activity Center meeting. We had 11 kids that day, and then it grew steadily to 25 to 30 to what it is today. We're ministering to about 1,600 kids a week in inner city. So
I started singing, and it was like something changed in the room. And I felt like there was, instead of the sadness that was present, it was something else, like a lightness, or maybe a break from the sadness, whatever it was, like some peace.
You know, living for something greater than yourself. It puts your life, it electrifies your life. It just makes it so powerful. My background taught me to read kids better, and you know, you could always tell when kids weren't being what they pretended to be. And when I worked with those adjudicated kids, there was a young man who he and his brothers were all involved in gangs, and there was a night where there was going to be a drug deal, and I knew it, and he was just playing it up like nothing was going on. And I said, "I will tell you that if I have to, I will park my truck in your driveway until the sun comes up, because I know what y'all are planning to do tonight, and you're not going to do it." Well, his brother left earlier, and he knew I would be there to check up on him, and so he didn't go. His brother was killed that night. And he lived. And he graduated from the program.
And so Dave and I, Pastor Dave and I formed a friendship, a strong bond, a covenant bond in the ministry. And from that time on, March 30th, 1996, we did a year and a half of Children's Activity Center in a rented building. The building that the church I was going to church at the time, Westside Christian Church, allowed us to use their sanctuary to bus the kids in. And we got in a bus from the school system of DeSoto, Texas. They donated a bus to us, and we got a bus. We bus kids into this little church every day. And we had to literally set up and tear down every time we came in. And we were there about 16 months until the kids are kind of wild. They started destroying the building and piece by piece. And the pastor just couldn't take it anymore, the elders there. And they decided to let us go out of there. So we had no real home to do the ministry in, except for a warehouse that we had rented, in a house we rented to live in. And Dave decided that we would have the kids come into the warehouse. So we started busing kids into this empty warehouse. It was incredible. We didn't have any stage. There was no type of, the plumbing was messed up. It looked like it was trash. It was bad. we did the best we could with it, but it was, but you know, the kid, it didn't matter to the kids where they were being bussed into, because they knew they were being loved, and the environment itself didn't bother them at all. They would come and by the numbers, hundreds, and Pastor Dave would minister to them, and we had no real plan at the time. Basically, every week we'd come up with some sort of schedule, and you know, we didn't have any format. We just opened our hearts and home, really. It's just opening our hearts and homes to the kids and bringing them on a weekly basis. And it was really powerful. And for a number of years, for 4 to 5 years, we did that on a weekly basis. And in 2000, Dave began, when he's preaching, began to get a rasp in his voice. It was bad. And sometime in late 2000, they diagnosed him with cancer. And
I started the ministry in '96, and it seems to be growing every week. Now we're up to about, last Monday it was 110 families, and on Thursday it was 161 families. And if you multiply that times 4, we're feeding over 1,000 people each week. We have 2 other outlying ministries. One of them picks up food from us, and the other we deliver food to them. So we're looking close to 1,500 families per week that we're giving food to.
I'm married to the founder of this organization. I usually spend my day praying with the people who come here and looking up their names in the computer. I come in before 7:45 in the morning so that we can have a circle of prayer before we get started. And then we make sure that the computer is turned on and that we've pulled up our Excel program that we keep all of the names in. We now have over 1,900 names, so it's not as easy as you might think to find the names when the people come in.
A few years ago, the church here allowed this ministry to incorporate. And when we incorporated and wrote our own bylaws, we said that we would not do fund drives, we would not do food drives, that we would simply identify our needs and would leave it up to God to provide the results. And as I said before, we're feeding so many people today, and we've never run out of food.
We see God working at the pantry on pretty much a daily basis. And I want to give you a couple of examples of when He has answered prayers almost instantaneously. One time was when a woman came in saying that she would, asking if we had any peanut butter because it was summertime and she had children at home. She really needed some peanut butter for them. Well, we didn't have any. And I went to the back and asked the people who worked in the back if they'd get with me and would pray about this. And so we prayed for peanut butter. I went back up to the front, and within just a very few minutes, a woman came in carrying I don't remember if it was 1 or 2 bags of canned goods. And they started going through those bags, and there were several jars of peanut butter. Another time when the person who took care of the back said, well, we're almost out of sweets, so you're going to have to just start giving the sweets to the large families. And I said, well, all of the families need a few sweets because these people can't afford to go out and buy sweets. They're, you know, what little money they have has to go on the actual necessities. So I got together with them and I said, let's pray about it. And we prayed about the sweets, and I told God exactly what I just said, you know, that these people really need something, to just a treat. And went back up to the front and hadn't even got back to my computer before she called out, well, here come the cakes, and a whole truckload of sweets had come in.
The best times that I have is when miracles occur, and we have miracles here every day. I can remember one time that I was getting ready to take a load to Galveston to the ship, and I was praying for eggs, and no eggs come in, and I asked the lady at the grocery store, is there any eggs? She said no. And I left the grocery store and packed my truck back here at the pantry and started to leave to go to Galveston. And I got about 2 streets past the grocery store on my way to Galveston. And she called me on the phone and said, "You need to come back." I went back to the grocery store, and 9 cases of eggs had just come in, and that's 30 dozen per case. And unbeknown to me, at the time I was praying, the cook down at the ship was also praying. So those 9 cases of eggs come in, and the stamp on the cases was incorrect. It didn't get all the stamp. Well, the grocery store has a rule that if the stamp is not correct, you can't re-stamp it. You have to get rid of the eggs. So I took 9 cases of eggs down the ship to Galveston. And there was some happy people there, but the cook couldn't tell the story because she broke down and started crying, and I had to finish the story for her at breakfast time down there.
Whereas at the beginning of 2001, cancer in his lymph node, not lymph nodes, but in his larynx, on his vocal cords, and they told him that if they could remove his voice box, that he could be healed of it. But at the time, he felt like God still wanted him to use his voice, and so he elected not to have the surgery, and he did some different steps, but the end result was he got sicker and sicker, and during the year of 2001, pretty much the whole year of 2001, and then in 2002, we spent a lot of time, Gilda's sister and his mom spent a lot of time helping Dave, so did I and others. We just ministered to him when he was dying. And in February, I believe, 2002, somewhere along the end of the month, the 22nd, he was in his trailer out behind the house where he worked, behind the center. And he literally, after breakfast one morning, bled to death. He walked out of his room, and blood was coming out of his neck. Literally bled to death and fell dead on the property.
Even though we knew we were in God's will, and this is exactly what He had for us to do, I have to say that there were times when I would look around and I would say, I can't believe I live here because of the conditions, orphans everywhere. Every time you stop at a stop sign, they're knocking on the window begging money. And they would say, "No maza, no faza, hungry." And they learned enough English to speak to foreigners. And I would ask myself over and over, can I do this?
Sometimes there were problems. And I would say that we're fortunate because Kay and I never got to the point where we said, let's go home at the same time. There were times I would come home and say, I've had it. I'm ready to go. And she'd say, oh, come on now. You know God has us here for a reason. And there were times when she would say, I can't take it anymore. And I'd hold her hand.
See, it's hard, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's hard.
I'd hold her hand and we'd get through it. But we were fortunate because we never both got there at the same time. But one time Kay had to come back to the States for medical reasons and I had to stay. It so happened she came back a week before 9/11. And so I'm in Ethiopia and she's in America. We're on different continents and there's this turmoil in the world. And I'm thinking, can't do this.
So, after his funeral, weeks went by, months went by, the Lord impressed in my heart to go and take this ministry to the deepest and darkest parts of our city, most violent ends of Houston. And we did. We got a truck and began to minister in 5th Ward of Houston, Texas. It's similar nature to South Central LA. It's sort of like Watts or Harlem in New York. It's really a devastated area. And I remember our third meeting, there was a riot that broke out, and the people were challenging us, trying to throw us out of the area. One kid told me, he said, Pastor Scott, you're about the 9th pastor that we've had here. The other ones ran away. And he goes, you'll be gone pretty soon too. And then during this riot, we had this riot out there. They're literally, we had a bread load, we had a truck of bread out there for the people, and they robbed us of the bread. I mean, we were going to give it to them, but they robbed us anyway. And then they set off fireworks and started fistfights along the edge of the perimeter of the ministry. While I was preaching, this fight broke out, and one woman got her ears, she had earrings in, and the other woman pulled her earrings out and tore her ears, and blood was coming outside of her head. And one little boy that was in our ministry site broke his leg during the mayhem. And I remember this woman, coming out of the dust of this fight, and this woman she said, you know, who are you? And what are you doing here? And she takes her hand like this, and she motions to all these kids, literally, she motions to all these kids and says, don't you know that all these kids are going to hell, and they all belong to me? And I realized at that moment that I had come face to face with the devil.
You know, we lived in Tomball, and we were going to church there, and we were just involved in church, and started to get involved in ministry just a little bit. And we had a business, and one camping trip one fall we went on, we just got this vision of being able to reach kids. Benny at the time was doing prison ministry and going into prison and working with prisoners, and we were involved with their kids, trying to reach them, also with the gospel. And we just started thinking what a neat thing it would be to have a place for them to come and maybe go fishing or ride a horse or do something like that. On a camping trip, we got this vision of being able to do it in a campground setting.
And a typical day at Gospel Lakes is filled with activity. A couple of bus loads of kids from the inner city will show up, 50 or 60, sometimes more volunteers waiting on them to get here, everybody having a spot and a position to play in that day. And of course, everything centers around the time that we can spend with them in the chapel to share the gospel of Jesus Christ with them. But while they're here, they get to paddle boat, go fishing, ride horses. They have a challenge course. They get a hay ride, those kinds of activities. There's a lot of interaction. There's a lot of relationship building going on here. A lot of volunteers spending a lot of time with these kids, really loving on these kids, showing them the love of Christ.
I had not had much contact with the same economic group of people that we see now. Previously, I had had some. There were times when I was growing up when we had a hard time. But there is a different culture. You learn to love them and to understand their problems, though, and if your heart is open to it, that can be a blessing too, because we weren't meant to stay in a greenhouse environment where everything is just perfect, everything is middle class, everything, people all have jobs, they work, they come home, they take care of their families. The majority of the world doesn't have the privilege of never being hungry. The majority of people in the world are not like they are in middle class America. And if we'll just open our eyes, the United States is not like that either in a great many places.
We weren't supposed to be here this year. And our accountant, matter of fact, was so amazed. He said, how did you make it? Because you're missing $75,000 from where you were in 2008. He says, I just don't understand how you could stay in doing this. And we were able to by the grace of God. It's just a miracle. And it was done by God, even on less money than we received the previous year. So I guess when we trust God that we can see him do miracle with less. It doesn't only have to do with, so many people are conned into the idea that God you have to have more and more and more. A lot of times God can take less and less and make more and more of it. Of course, we see those examples in Scripture over and over again. But the miracle is that people do give into this ministry, and that we spend most of our time and all of our time ministering to children. So we don't have any fundraising effort here. Our fundraising effort is just both knees on the ground.
So Judy on the camping trip gets this idea, vision, if you will. Wouldn't it be great to have a place in the country and have a couple of these kids up every now and then? So we like to say her vision got out of hand, because in the last 11 years we've probably had 30-something thousand kids at our home, and which is what we would call a vision out of hand, but it's a good problem to have. And so as time went on, it's a funny thing, because when we started this camp, neither Judy nor I had ever been to camp. We weren't raised as Christians, and so we didn't know what Christian camp was or what it looked like or anything like that. We just knew that God was calling us to do this sort of thing.
You know, most of these kids will never come into a church. Most of these kids are in situations where no one will ever invite them to a church, never invite them to a Bible study, never invite them to come and hear the Word of God. So what we're doing here in Inner City of Houston is really taking the gospel directly to them and ministering to them right where they are, to relevant issues that are going through their lives at the current time, and to plant that precious seed of the Word of God in their hearts now before it's too late. What do I mean by too late? Well, what I mean by too late is by the 11 years of age, about half to a little over half of these kids have already been sexually active, many with an adult. And their lives are soiled. At some point, and I've seen it again and again in inner city, some point between 11 and 13 years of age, that once an open kid, a happy kid, a kid that was receptive, a kid that would hug you, turns into a kid that won't look at you, has stone eyes. At 13 and 14 years of age, you know what? They've made their mind up about what their lives are going to be like, and they model everything around them. So our program, the Children's Activity Center and the Children's Activity Truck, reaches these kids at a very young age with the gospel, reaches out to them and shows them that someone loves them, someone cares about them, and that Jesus did in fact shed his blood and die for them on the cross. You know, people don't care what you have to say until they know that you love them.
So as time went on, Judy began to look as she is gifted, and Judy can see a rundown house and want to save it, so she can repair anything. So she found this place. As she looked over time, it was a long time. She looked at, I don't know how many places you looked at, maybe 100, I don't know, but over time, she found this. God led her to find this. It was this old catfish farm, and this place was horrible. It was run down. It had been abandoned for 10 years. The whole place was grown up. What you see here now, when we first got here, you couldn't see because it was all grown up with underbrush, and where you see a pavilion would be an old caved-in pole barn with snakes and skunks and hornets and you name it in there. But Judy can see past all that. The building up front that we now call our camp building was completely run down. The entrance that you walk into was rotted and caved in. The floors were bare. The ceilings were falling down. And I remember the first day that Judy brought me here, and we were standing in that building, and she goes, "This is it. This is it." And I really was looking around, kind of thinking, this ain't it. And so I said, "Judy, this is, I don't know what you think this is, but this is not it." And she goes, "Yes, it is." And at the time, we were standing in the dining hall what is now the dining hall. There were vines growing in the window. The ceiling was falling down. There was literally a 4-foot snakeskin shed on the floor. And she's telling me, this is it. And I said, Judy, for us to stay debt-free, we're going to have to sell our house in Tomball, and we would have to move into this building. To be able to buy this place, we would have to move into this building and live in this building. And I thought I had her there, but she said, I don't care if I have to live in a tent in the front yard. This is it. And she was right. And so we've been here ever since.
All of the training and all of the experience I had as a manager for a multinational corporation for 30 years suddenly came into play. I began to understand why God had done some of the things he'd done, why he'd put me through jobs that didn't make any sense at the time. He was preparing me for this moment to be the leader of a team for which I had no experience and no training officially, but I had been trained on the job. The work that God gave us to do was so fulfilling that I kept saying, what else could a man want?
I was doing the hayride. And so I'm driving the tractor, and we have a covered wagon looking thing, and I bring them out in the field, and I brought them around by this big pine tree. And when I would bring the group by the pine tree, I would stop in the shade, talk with them, share the gospel with them. And we just happened to have the kids from the city of Conroe up that day, and their summer counselors, who are teenagers, were in that wagon with the smaller kids. Well, my thought was to talk with the smaller kids. I asked the kids who had been here before. I was talking to the children. And so, because I just kind of figured they've probably been up here maybe with a church, or they could have been up here with a different group. And so I expected to see one or two hands of who had been here before, but none of the little kids raised their hand, and all of the teenagers raised their hand. And I said, when were you guys up here? And they said, don't you recognize us as Mr. Hashem? We've been coming up here since we were little kids. And some of them began to tell me how they were saved here. And now they were ministering to the little kids that were in the wagon. And I'll tell you, if money can't buy that.
I realized you don't take your money to the grave with you. You don't take your fancy car. Whatever you have, sure, you can leave it to your kids. But now I'm leaving something greater than myself. I'm leaving a legacy. But more than that, when I touch a kid's life, I'm giving him hope not just for this life, for however many more years he'll walk on the earth, but if I touch him the right way, and if I touch him deep enough, and if I touch him with that relationship with Christ that I keep going back to, then I've given him hope for all eternity. I've left an eternal legacy. How do you beat that?
You know, that first year was the toughest time.
Yeah.
You want to
Okay.
talk about it?
Yeah, I suppose that would be. I guess I would say the hardest time over there for me was the first year, because we were in Addis about a month. We got a phone call, and our oldest son had died in the States. And it was very unexpected, and here we are in Africa, and get word our son died. So obviously we flew back to the U.S. and dealt with all of that. It was very difficult to know that our daughter had to handle all those situations that go along with that because we weren't there. So it was put on her shoulders. And that next year, I was kind of like a zombie. I just put one foot after the other and followed John around. And after 10, 11 months or so, I just got mad. I just got mad. And I said, Satan has robbed me of my son, and he's robbed me of a third of my assignment here in Ethiopia, almost a whole year. And it's over. It's over. I'm going to come and do what God had for me to do. And while the hurt was still there, the pain of losing my oldest son was still there. I could start putting one foot after the other, and God just continued to give me peace and help me to find my niche and do what I needed to do.
I remember one camp we had about 70 kids from Clayton Homes, which is an inner city project down off of 59 and I-10, and had a big day. I mean, at the time, you have to realize we weren't organized. We didn't have a program. We didn't know what a camp was supposed to look like. We literally would say things like, well, what do you want to do now? And somebody would say, let's ride the horses. And then we would all go catch the horses, saddle them, and get underneath a tree just like here and just start taking turns riding the horses. So that day was a hot day, big day for us. And we were absolutely worn out, and we were spent. We had made a mistake at the end of the day and had decided that we would cut up a bunch of watermelon and serve everybody watermelon. Well, the kids started having, the inner city kids got out of hand, and they started having there was watermelon everywhere. In the building, on the walls, on the floor. And of course, at the end of that day, the buses leave, everybody had to leave, and Judy and I are left there alone in this big mess, totally tired. And I was frustrated with the whole ordeal. And I remember, to top it all off, I walked into the bathrooms. I walked into the men's bathroom, and somebody had diarrhea, and it was all over the place. Then I walked into the ladies' bathroom, and somebody had gotten sick and had thrown up all over the place. And so, as I was standing there, I remember that Judy came up with the cleaning supplies and rubber gloves. And she said, if you want to be in ministry, this is part of it. We need to put these gloves on. And do what God has called us to do.
I was on the truck in October, and it was unusually hot that day. I remember it was in the 90s, and we decided that we would like to help the kids, so we had several coolers of water that we set up stations for. And I got down on my knees on the stage to help the kids with the water. And I was giving them water. And one kid grabbed the water out of my hand and threw it right in my face. Called me a couple names, and I got up. I was kind of angry about that. I had a struggle, and as I was wiping the water off my face, the phone rang in the truck, and I picked the phone up and I flipped at a razor phone. I flipped it up, and the voice was my brother, and he was staggering, and he said, "Scott, Mom's dying. She just had a heart attack. What do I do? Do I tell the doctor to unplug this thing, or they tell me to, well, please tell me what to do. So I had the phone in my hand, and I'm looking out to the kids, and I just gotten plastered with this water in the face by this kid. And I said, well, Brad, I said, look, he said, just you have peace about you shut the thing off, okay? And I said, I love you, brother. And I closed the phone because I realized I said, I'll call you in 30 minutes. And I flipped the phone closed, and I looked back, and the thoughts going through my mind of, I'd left home a long time ago, and I hadn't stayed in touch with my mom over the years, off and on, because of the work here, and it was difficult to have that relationship I wanted to. And, it just struck me that day that, is all this really worth it?
Back in that time, Wayne Watson had a song called "For Such a Time as This," and we would listen to music while we cleaned after camp. We would listen to music while we cleaned after camp, and we would put that song on especially. And I can remember thinking, for such a time as this, and I didn't even really know all that was going on, but I just knew that I would much rather be here cleaning up than getting back on that bus and going back to the inner city, to the darkness that they have to live in. And I knew that if we could provide some hope for them and a place for them to come to see God at work, to see his creation, and just be involved in life outside of that darkness, it was all worth it.
I think my passion about the destitute women in particular started with Kebenish. And Kebenish is a lady that I met in a hut with her pastor's wife and 3 or 4 other women. And these women were telling me their stories, and they don't often tell their stories to foreigners because it seems so hard, and it is. 3 of the women out of the 5 were bride by abduction. And bride by abduction means they were kidnapped as they were coming home from school or the market by a man who decided that he wanted that woman to be his bride. So he will kidnap her, and he would take her, and he would rape her, and then hold her prisoner till he paid off her parents with a goat or something. And then there was no doubt that the girl belonged to him. Well, 3 of the 5 women in that hut that day were bride by abduction. They told me their stories. The 4th woman didn't want to tell her story. Her name was Kebenish, and her friends kept encouraging her to tell the story. So finally she started to tell me her story. And this is it in a nutshell. She married a man and had his child, and he abandoned her. So she married another man, and she had his child, and he abandoned her. So then she lived with the man, and she had his child, and he abandoned her. So her assessment was she was unlovable, and she had bought poison and was going to the woods to take the poison and leave her children with the church ladies. And so she was sitting on the floor, so I went over to her and I tried to pull her up, and I said, Kebenish, you are a princess. And she wouldn't even stand up. She was so depressed. And I said, Kebenish, you are a princess. And I tried to pull her up. You are a daughter of the king. Not just any king, but the King of Kings. You are the daughter of the King of Kings. And she's still no response. She was just out of it. And so when I left that day, I really couldn't get Kebenish off of my brain. And so I went back to town and I called one of our team members and I said, Vickery, I want to buy a goat. And he said, Kay, why for you need a goat? And I said, I want to buy a goat for Kebenish so she can sell the goat's milk and make a living for her children and get some self-esteem and be able to provide for her family. And he said, that won't work in that village. They don't drink goat's milk. And I said, then help me know how to help Kebenish. He went up the next day and he talked to Kebenish. He said to her, if there was a way you could make a living and support your children, what would you do? And she immediately said, I would bake injera, which is the local bread. And bread, I'm very good. But I have no wood to build a fire. I have no bucket to mix it. I have no clean water. I have no oven to make it on. How can I? How can I? And so Fikre came back to town and he told me about this. So I said, how much will it cost to buy that stuff? And he said, I will go to the market, I will find out. So Fikre goes to the market, he comes back and he said, Kay, it will cost $60. I said, let's do it. Let's go take Cavendish to the market and buy this and get her started in her micro business. And Fikre said, do we have $60? Well, I didn't know if we had $60, but we were going to have $60. So I asked John, do we have $60 in the women's ministry? And he said, let me look. He looked, and we had exactly $60 that a friend had given me as a tithe from something that she was doing. And she said, I want this to be for the destitute women of Ethiopia. And we took that $60 and we started Cavendish in her bread baking. And she, within a week, she was sold out every day by noon. She was the best bread baker in the village.
One morning, I was in the office. The day before, I had made a promise to the kids. It was back in 1999. I made a promise to the children that God would provide all of their school supplies. And that it was about the time we were ministering to about 500 kids. And I said, you know, God is going to do this. We took up an offering. The kids would take up an offering. They put the money in the offering. And I thought, wow, that's cool. You know, all these kids coming forth. And then when I got back to my office, the devil started impressing, trying to tempt me into despair. I said, well, you just told these kids that every kid here was going to get school supplies, all 500 of them, and you don't have a nickel. And you got 10 days, and you know what? At the end of that 10 days, you're the fool, and your ministry is fool, and you're a liar. Satan was basically pushing me to despair. Well, so we prayed about that in our prayer meeting, and we left it to the Lord. And the week before we'd have all these school supplies, there was a drunken woman that I ministered to. She was drunk, and she came in the front door of the ministry, and she came in, and she wanted help, and she said, you know, I can't make it, and she was slurring her speech. She said, I have kids at home. I have no husband. I have no way of making it. And I said, honey, I said, you need to grab hold of yourself. You need to come in that altar and get on your knees and ask God to forgive you and help you. You know Jesus. She said, I don't really want to do it, but okay, so I brought her to the altar, and she was praying at the altar, and she said, and she was telling God the same thing she was telling me. And so she's doing this, and then there was a knock on the door.
I loaded it on the truck and headed down there with a group of people that didn't know I was coming. And when I knocked on the door of an 80-year-old lady that I had been delivering food to for several years, she come to the door and she started crying uncontrollable. And I know this lady for several years, and I'd never seen her cry like that. I took the food in and told her I've got to go back to the truck to get something else. And when I come back, she had calmed down enough, and she said, I need to share with you. She said, I went to bed last night praying that God would send me some food in the morning. And she said, I got up and you knocked on my door, and now you're standing with a box of food.
And so I answered the door, and I opened the door up, and there was this guy out there, this white man, and he looked like Indiana Jones to me. And he was a businessman, though. And he said, I need to see Pastor Scott. And he said, is he here? And I said, yeah, I'm Pastor Scott. He goes, I've been trying to get you off my mind for the last couple of years now. And I was driving in your neighborhood today, and for some reason he said, your name has come to my Pocket Pilot thing. He said, every time I try to take a note, it's your name comes at the top. So I thought I'd come by and visit you and see what you need. I didn't know him. And so I said, well, we're trying to get some school supplies together for like this lady here at the altar. She's praying, and her kids, and we have a lot of kids like that, and we have about 500. And I said, okay. He said, he goes, what does it cost per kid? I mean, how much? I'd like to give a little bit, see if I can help you. He said, I said, well, Jack, his name is Jack. I said, well, it would be like let's say $12, $10. Let's say $10 a kid. He said, okay. He said, let me go get a check for you. And so he walked out to the truck and he came with a checkbook. And he wrote me a check for $10,000. He said, that's $10 a kid. You have 500 kids. I want to give double supplies to the kids. And so he handed us a check for $10,000. And the first lady, she was praying at the altar. She heard this conversation as she prayed. She got on her knees and started praising God. And she asked God to forgive her. And from that moment on, this woman had been, the power of God, just hit her, and she was restored. And she never drank, she never got back into those things again. And she started being a single mom that started following Christ. And I remember thinking, because that was such a highlight day, because that was a day of a mixture between a setback or trying to deal with problems and the absolute miracle of God kind of colliding in a way that kind of highlights a lot of what happens here. To some degree, those events happen every day in this ministry.
I know it's wrong to worry, but I tend to be the worrier in the family. Benny's the visionary. I'm the detail person. I tend to look at every little detail of everything that comes our way and figure out how we can manage it. And God has really grown my faith through all this, because when you have to coordinate volunteers, inner city kids, food, people, volunteers to walk the horses, to run the paddle boats, to run you have to coordinate all these things. And these are all just, you're talking to a couple of people and they're saying, yeah, I'm going to round up people and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. Your faith, you either go crazy or your faith grows, because you have to understand that when that bus shows up, those kids are going to be on there. You don't know how many. Nobody's going to tell you ahead of time. They have to get up and get on the bus. The volunteers are going to drive in the driveway. They're going to show up. You don't know how many. They have to be prompted to do that. So we do a lot of praying. We do a lot of calling on God to just provide. And He always has. Sometimes we've thought, we don't have enough volunteers today. But you know what? He always gets the job done.
Every day I continually wonder if I'm going to have enough. But that shows that I don't have enough faith, because we've never run out of food.
A couple of years back, I was in the inner city during the winter, in the winter months, and I was going through a project called Kennedy, and it was like 42 degrees, and it was raining, cold, and I looked over on the bench, and there was a girl sitting, a 13, 14-year-old girl. She's sitting on a stone bench, a black girl, and she had no coat. Matter of fact, she had a T-shirt on that was soaked by the rain, and the steam from her body heat was coming off her back. The steam was coming in. And I walked up to her, and I asked her, she had her head down like this, and I asked her, I said, honey, are you okay? And she gave me no reply. I said, I thought, thinking she was lost or something happening. I said, where do you live? And I had to bend down, kind of get her attention. I said, where is your home? And she lifts her finger up and she points to the door about 20 yards away. She goes, I live there. And she put her hand down. And at that moment, I realized that this girl was freezing in the rain, because outside in the rain, in the cold, was better than her home.
I didn't always understand in my life that I had a Father looking out for me, and that is my Heavenly Father. I look back at my life, and I've had a number of near-death experiences, and I now know that He was keeping me for His purpose. And it was God driving me and propelling me and giving me the energy that hope against all hope that I had was something He put in me and something He puts in everyone. But there's a point in everybody's life where they make a decision, whether they will deny that and pretend it's not where their strength comes from, or whether they will embrace it. And if you choose to embrace it, embrace God, not religion, but God Himself, you are catapulted, literally launched to something so much greater than yourself.
I worked at a number of jobs before I retired, and I've been a substitute teacher in grade schools and junior highs. I've been a secretary. I've been a network administrator over 3 networks at the same time. But when I retired and started working at the food pantry, I found what real joy in my work can be. And yes, it is a lot of work. It is not an easy job because I take care of all of the paperwork and the computer work. And sometimes, especially when I'm working on the 990 during the first part of the year to send it to the federal government, a few times I've wanted to tear my hair out because it was getting difficult. But it's all been worth it. And it has brought joy to our marriage. It has just given us a new outlook on life.
I worked a lot of jobs in my life. I retired from IBM after 27 years. But at the same time I was working for IBM, I owned a home air conditioning repair business and had 2 trucks running. Most of the time somebody was out working when I was at IBM. But after I left IBM and retired, just before I got into this type of business, I run 2 other businesses. One was a video business, making educational CDs, and then still running the air conditioning business. But I got to the point where this ministry started taking all of my time, and it's the best job I've ever had in my life. Money-wise, it pays 0. You know, we even pay our own expenses. Nobody gets a salary in this ministry, but it's still the best job I've ever had in my life.
About 7 years ago, we were doing before Pastor Dave died, we did Puppet Mania, which we use puppets to reach kids in the inner city. And we went to this particular, complex on Southwest Side, and it had rained that day. I mean, the water was everywhere. There's mud, and I said, Dave, do you think we should call this off? He said, nope, we never call anything off. And that's kind of what he taught me over the years, is no matter what the situations is, as far as physical situations, you never stop preaching the gospel. And so we were in this, the only place that we could actually do the puppet show was in a laundry room. And we set up in this laundry room, and it was like 92 degrees outside. And on the inside, they had the laundry, like they had the dryers running without the vents hooked up, and so it was 100-some in there. And we had lights and puppets stuff, and so we did some puppet shows for the kids and ministered to them, and talked about Jesus. And we had an altar call for the kids, and there was this little boy and his sister. They came up and received Christ, and I remember, and this is hindsight, but I handed this kid a ball. It said, it had a little smiley face on the front of it, little rubber ball. It said Jesus loves. It says smile on the back, on the front of the ball, and on the back of the ball it says Jesus loves you. And so he took it and he jammed it in his pocket and he ran home. Well, about a week later, we were driving our bus down the road there to pick kids up to go to the Children's Activity Center, and he and his sister were standing on the corner, and they got in, and they just kept coming every week, and they invited some of the other kids to come, and I started visiting the home of the kid. It was a fractured family, and the boy himself was being medicated he had behavioral problems, and was being medicated with Ritalin and other drugs that a psychiatrist had prescribed. And so he kept coming back. He was an old, quiet boy, little, And one day we had a contest we gave away a motorbike for the one that brought the most kids to church. Well, he did. He brought the most kids to church, and he won the motorbike. And over this time, his mom started mentioning to me that his behavior began to change, and his life started. He said he's not causing much trouble anymore, and things are happening in a strong way, and he never stopped coming to the CAC. Well, when we got our TV equipment set back up, he asked me if he could become part of the TV production area in our ministry, and he did, and started working with him there. And one thing led to another. He started doing all kinds of projects for us, and he went on a mission trip to Toledo, Ohio with us to set up a ministry in Toledo, and is active in doing missions work. And the amazing thing is this recently, he's been hired by Lakewood Church to do their audiovisual stuff and work on their department, and also was been offered jobs as far away as New York City. And of course, last year, something strange happened. He just turned 17. They're 17 years old. And he said, Pastor Scott, he came up to me one day during the service. He said, do you remember this? And he reached in his pocket, and he pulled out that ball. He says, since I've been a little boy, I've kept this ball in my pocket to remind me that God loved me. Do you remember giving it to me that day? Yeah. Yeah, because it was a day that you didn't really want to be out there. It was a day that was hard being a mess. But there's fruit, and then Jesus says in his word, I want you to bear fruit that lasts.
It was a big shift to say, okay, let's sell the house and move out here and begin to take that challenge and with all that's involved, and you know that God's moving you to do that, and there's some areas that you have to just by faith. You just have to just do it. But it was after a little while that we had made that step of faith, because I believe firmly that God says this. He says in his word that he will direct your steps. And a friend of mine says that God doesn't move parked cars. That when he says he'll direct your steps, that means you're moving. It might be baby steps, but it's moving by faith in that direction.
First thing they need to do is pray and pray and pray and listen, open their hearts to listen to God. And then when God gives them small steps to take that small step, it's like walking in the dark with a flashlight. You walk as far as the flashlight shines, knowing that that's what God has called you to do. And then when you get there, he'll shine the light a little bit further. You may not know the way through the forest, but if you follow that one step at a time, little baby steps, doing what God calls, eventually you'll get to the point where you know what his mission is for right now. We didn't have a clue when we started this, but we took these little steps of going on mission trips and helping agencies and responding to the small calls. Because if he'd have told us he was going to send us to Ethiopia, we'd have probably said, you're crazy.
And as we began to move in that direction, we had no idea really that God was going to call us into full-time ministry.
When I try to talk to people about my faith, they hear religion. And I'm trying to tell them it's not religion, it's relationship. It's a relationship with God. But because we do religion in the United States, it's the first thing they hear. And so you have to break through that filter and try and help them to understand, no, it's life. It's and it's bigger and it greater than us. And there's so much more that we could be and we could experience, and so much greater and fuller that life could be if we would just accept that.
I think I spent a lot of my life searching for like meaning, some kind of meaning in my life, like purpose. And I mean, I did a lot of searching, soul searching, reading books. I was big into reading books and how to, etc., self-growth, and a lot of writing and journaling. And I really came to a realization at some point. I came to a realization that like I was looking for meaning. I was searching for meaning in my life, like I was looking for buried treasure. You know, like it's there to find. I just got to look in the right place. I got to keep looking. At some point, I'll find the buried treasure. And I realized that it's not something to be found. It's something to be created.
Well, a lady came in one day and asked me what the will of God for was. She had prayed. She says, Pastor Scott, I just don't know what the will of God is for me. Well, I said, well, we need some help in our ministry with cleanup after the service. That could be something you could do. She goes, oh no, I don't think that would be something I'd like to do. I went, ma'am, I said, you've been praying for the will of God, and there's a need in the body of Christ. That is the will of God. She goes, how do you know that? I said, what you need to do, ma'am, is you need to get off of your knees and start obeying God and doing something. And so, years ago, Pastor Bill Wilson, New York City, preached on this, and I believe it. I believe the need is the call. And I believe that people won't know the full will of God in their lives until they actually act in obedience to a need in the body.
You don't have to go overseas. There are all kinds of ways to get involved in being salt and light in your community or wherever. You know, Jesus said go into Judea, Samaria. What's the other one? I forget. I always forget. Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. We're at the ends of the earth.
We are at the end of the earth.
But there are always things to do in Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria. In other words, at home and a little farther and a little farther.
Who we are is we're social creatures. We're about connecting with others and growing together and helping each other. That's who we are as human beings, right?
There'll be days that you'll have doubts, but we never doubted for one moment about God being here. Every time we turned around, and still to this day, every time we turn around, God would assure us that this was where we were supposed to be.
Quite often, you have a truck breakdown or something, and you have a load that's supposed to come in and does not come in, and you wonder if you're going to have sufficient food. But the food has always been there, and I guess it's a weakness of our faith because we've never run out of food. And I keep emphasizing that because, if you depend on God, He always comes through.
Everything that I worried about that I would lose if I went into full-time ministry, I actually gained. And everything that I thought would be a problem actually turned out to be a blessing. And so my challenge would be this. God directs your steps. Take steps of faith. If you have a desire in your heart to move in any direction toward ministry, whether it be full-time, part-time, anything that you can think of that would come upon your mind and your heart about building the kingdom, take a step.